The change agenda for this year and for this decade is going to be, we've got to ride the horse of adaptation as well as the horse of mitigation and prevention. We've got to face up to the increasing vulnerability that we are in the middle of in this unprecedented new hot world that we are moving into. And again, that vulnerability, when we admit to it, there's a real hope there. I believe that in 2020, we're going to see a lot more Extinction Rebellion actions which try to draw attention to that kind of vulnerability, which draw attention, for example, to the really disastrous just-in-time system that we have for food in this country, the way we're dependent on supermarkets which are constantly stocking and restocking their shelves in an incredibly fragile system that's vulnerable, as we saw, for example, those of you who are my kind of age will remember during the fuel protests under the Blair government, when just a few thousand lorry drivers blockading oil depots started to bring to a halt an awful lot of what goes on in this society, to bring to a halt driving, to start to bring to a halt delivery of food to supermarkets. We want to do that kind of thing too, but with a different agenda, right? The point would be to say we are highly vulnerable. We are moving into a world, tragically, where we are ever more vulnerable. If we allow this to get out of control, if we allow ourselves to be hit by a kind of crisis of vulnerability that could result, for example, from an unprecedented heat wave of the kind that we had last year, imagine that, but redoubled. Imagine the kind of heat wave that we had last year, which knocked out lots of crops in this country. Imagine that heat wave going on into August and September and burning our crops in the fields. And you think, yes, but we're a rich country, we're a developed country, we can always buy food from abroad. But what if there isn't any food abroad? What if we have a situation like we had in 2008, but it's even worse? Most people don't know what happened in 2008 because everyone's attention was on the financial crisis. At the same time, many countries in the world stopped all food exports. There was a food crisis, and many countries in the world banned exports of rice and wheat and so on and so forth. We are vulnerable in this country, right? This crisis that we're in the middle of, this is not just about Bangladesh and the Maldives and Nigeria and Australia. Yeah, those places are really suffering right now. But don't let that fool you into thinking that it's not going to hit us. We are vulnerable. So there's a brilliant opening here for Extinction Rebellion to do critical, authentic actions where we make ourselves vulnerable. We put our bodies on the line in order to show the vulnerabilities in the system, to try to get those vulnerabilities changed before it's too late, rather than waiting for after it's too late. And that seems to me a really exciting domain of actions that we could move into in this year. Imagine if we do stuff around ports or around supermarket distribution depots that manages to show very clearly by, for example, temporarily stopping the movement into supermarkets of a certain class of goods. Maybe, it might be some kind of luxury good or something, right? To make the point of just how vulnerable we are. Yeah, and by doing that, maybe we manage to start to kind of to turn the story and to turn the page on this sense, this kind of crazy sense that this government has, that the 20s is going to be a decade of prosperity and growth for this country. The longer that kind of nonsense continues, the more we move off the precipice. Because this is the point I want to end with. We're not being driven towards the edge of a cliff. We're not being shunted off a precipice. We're already off the cliff. We're already off the cliff and falling down towards these jagged rocks that are at the bottom. What we have to do is we have to painfully, with great difficulty, try to arrest our descent and then start to climb back up the cliff again. That's how difficult the task is going to be. But that's all we have to do, right? There is no alternative. The only other thing that I mean when I talk about adaptation is it would be better to try to sort of remain where we are, hanging on by our fingertips, halfway down the cliff, than to fall on the jagged rocks at the bottom, right? That's worth doing too. That's worth fighting for. Yeah? What we really got to not fool ourselves the way we've got to not fool ourselves is don't think that those rocks are not our destination. They are very much our destination. We are already off the cliff. We have a massive job to turn everything around. We will probably fail, but the thing you really don't want to do is have to face your children or grandchildren in 20 years' time or whatever, when it's clear that we're right down among the rocks dying. You really don't want to have to face them and say, I wish I tried harder. God, I wish I'd done more. Don't be that person. Join us. Let's do enough. Thank you.